This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Chapter 55, What is Written in Prophecy, and our symbol is the dragon.
The sideways dragon. Because there is that other front-facing dragon.
Oh, yeah.
This is sort of the sideways. This is the banner dragon. This is the symbol on the... Cool. I'm making claw motions at Patrick. I don't know why. This is the symbol on the banner.
Let's call it the dragon banner. Rand entered the chamber slowly. Walking among the great polished redstone columns he remembered from his dreams. Silence filled the shadows, yet something called to him. And something flashed ahead, a momentary light throwing back a shadow, a beacon. He stepped out beneath the great dome and saw what he sought. Kalendor, hanging hilt down in midair, waiting for no hand but that of the dragon reborn. As it revolved, it broke what little light there was into splinters, and now and then it flared as if it was a light of its own, calling him, waiting for him. If I am the dragon reborn, if I'm not just some half-mad man cursed with the ability to channel, a puppet dancing for Moraine in the White Tower. Take it, Lews Therin. Take it, Kinslayer. He spun to face the voice. The tall man with close-cropped white hair, who stepped from the shadows among the columns, was familiar to him. Rand had no idea who he was. This fellow in a red silk coat, with black stripes down its puffy sleeves, and black breeches tucked into elaborately silver-worked boots. He did not know the man, but he had seen him in his dreams. You put them in a cage, he said. Egwene and Nynaeve and Elaine, in my dreams. You kept putting them in a cage, and hurting them. The man made a dismissive gesture with his hand. They are less than nothing. Perhaps one day, when they have been trained, but not now. I confess surprise that you cared enough to make them useful, but you were ever a fool, ever ready to follow your heart before power. You came too soon, Lews Therin. Now you must do what you are not ready for, or else die. Die knowing you have left these women you care for in my hands. He seemed to be waiting for something, expectant. I mean to use them more, Kinslayer. They will serve me, serve my power, and that will hurt them far more than anything they have suffered before. Behind Rand, Kalendor flashed, throwing one pulse of warmth against his back. Who are you? You do not remember me, do you? The white-haired man laughed suddenly. I do not remember you either, looking this way. A country lad with a flute case on his back? Did Ishmael speak the truth? He was ever one to lie when it gained him an inch or a second. Do you remember nothing, Lews Therin? A name, Rand demanded. What is your name? Call me Balal.
I have like 7 bullet points in that paragraph to talk about.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, there's just, yeah.
All right. So
I didn't know where to stop highlighting, so that's what happened. Where do you want to start with that?
First, I want to start with this flashing that comes from within Kalendor.
Yeah.
Okay. Kalendor is calling to him. You know, we talked about the dreams that Balal has created to push him towards his place. Mm-hmm. But something within the sword itself is calling to him. And that can't be Balal.
No.
Because he can't touch it.
Right.
So that has to be...
Not even with a weave.
It has to be basically confirmation that he's the Dragon Reborn.
Is it flashing because Rand is there, or does it just always do that?
I want to say that it's been flashing as he's gotten closer. Now, we've seen that flashing only in Teleran Riyadh.
True. But up until now, we've only seen Kalendor and Teleran Riyadh, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I want to say this pulsing is something that really only that is the sword calling out to Rand, and that's part of perhaps the weaves that were woven into it by the Aes Sedai who placed it there.
And there is this line later: Kalendor flashed, throwing one pulse of warmth against his back. That seems like more physical. It's not just like a light reflection from a torch in the room or something. This is like something.
I want to talk a little bit about the history of Kalendor, because we have seen Kalendor in the past. We saw it in one of Rand's visions. It was sitting on the table next to the horn.
I don't really remember this. What was it? A dream?
When he passed through the pillars and he was seeing the old visions of the Aes Sedai. The Aes Sedai who created Ruidion also had Kalendor. He saw Kalendor in that vision. And it wasn't in the stone yet. The stone hadn't been created.
But he hasn't passed through the pillars yet.
No. So he doesn't know that yet.
Gotcha.
But we have seen that before. We've seen that in the Shadow Rising. I like that idea. Fate's idea, if they tie the pillars to the blood of the Aiel, right? So you have to have the blood of the Aiel to see the visions. Can they tie the sword to the soul of the dragon?
Apparently so.
So it looks like it. Because how else are they going to specify that Rand is the one who's going to pick it up?
Yeah.
Somehow they have to be able to detect the soul of the dragon reborn.
Interesting that both Kalendor and the visions of his past are both amid redstone columns. I don't think the redstone columns are actually significant, but they're both.
They're Terangrial.
But the other columns are glass.
Yes.
I'm a dummy. Okay, never mind.
Well, that is a good point that you have.
They're both a mid column.
You do have a very similar structure, which is a bunch of columns with something significant in the center. And we know the same Aes Sedai created both.
Mm-hmm. They must have really been fixated on one form of architecture.
So one theory that I've read recently, and I haven't done a lot of research into it, but I kind of like it, is the idea that the Aes Sedai used the red twisted doorframe Terangrial in Ruidion to visit the Finns and create the red stone doorway that basically used a wish.
To create the way to get there?
Sorry, to create the glass tower Terangrial. The Aiel history Terangrial, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that they're somehow connected to...
That somehow, yeah, and I just read that recently, that somehow the connection between... Because how else would they have created... You know, we know that the Finn can create Terangrial because they created Matt's Ashendari. Or at least they have access to them.
Matt's pendant.
His pendant, and also his Ashendari, I would say, is a Terangrial.
Yeah?
That's actually a good question, guys. Well, it's certainly a power-forged weapon, but it also it allows him to create a doorway into and out of the world of the Finn.
It's like a giant key.
Exactly. I don't think it's just a power-forged weapon. I think it's also a Terangrial.
I like it.
Okay, so that's my first point.
Okay.
He sees Bilal. He has no idea who he is. Later, Rand knows the faces of all the Forsaken. He remembers them. So It just sort of gives us an idea that perhaps there's some transition from Lews Therin, but not a whole lot at this point.
Yes.
Because he still doesn't have a lot of the memories, especially about the Forsaken. That's going to help him out later.
He's not insane enough to be competent yet.
Exactly. Exactly. And he also hasn't compartmentalized Lews Therin in his head.
True.
There is no entity Lews Therin yet. He hasn't created that. And yes, you can argue with me that he's a real entity versus something that Rand created.
That Lews Therin's actually, well, I don't believe that.
I don't believe that either. I believe the LTT in Rand's head is an artificial creation of Rand because he's insane. And he's
compartmentalizing?
Thank you. His insanity into another voice in his head. Another point that, like, Bilal here realizes that these women could be a threat if they were trained. It's like, they're no threat now, but if they were trained up, they could be. I'm thinking to, like, Moghedien.
Yep.
All of our heroes learn from Forsaken and learn Age of Legends weaves from Forsaken.
And they pretty much have to, because it's their only way to learn well. To be able to beat the Forsaken, they need the knowledge of the Forsaken.
Exactly. My last point from that paragraph is Bilal is saying, did Ishmael speak the truth? Do you remember nothing? Which means, A, there's communication between the Forsaken. But why would he remember anything? Like, I don't have any... Why would Bilal... Of course that would be the truth. Why would he remember anything from his previous life? No one ever has before.
I don't know. I suppose the Forsaken sort of expect Lews Therin, in quotes, to be something like them, you know, a force to be reckoned with. But because the Forsaken never died, they were imprisoned, they are able to remember because they've only lived one life for this last 3,000 years. Whereas Lews Therin died and was reborn as Rand al'Thor.
Exactly. So he shouldn't remember.
Yeah.
So why does Bilal, like, kind of act surprised? He's like, do you really remember nothing? Of course he remembers nothing. He's been killed.
Yeah, I want to stick with that. I feel like it's more like Bilal is having trouble believing that the Dragon Reborn is a farm boy who carries around a flute to play for his dinner. Like I could see how that would be unbelievable.
Right.
You know?
Right. You'd expect
He's
him
just
to be greater.
Like, is it really going to be this easy? More like that, you know?
He's a farm boy with a flute case and a moraine. That's what you got to look out for.
A hidden moraine. Take the sword, countryman. Perhaps it will be enough to help you survive me. And I feel like all I want to note about that is Bilal needs Rand to take the Kalendor so that then Bilal can take it from him.
Exactly.
If Rand just doesn't take it, then nobody gets Kalendor.
It just stays there forever.
He can kill Rand al'Thor all day,
right.
And Kalendor will just sit there.
And then he'll just be one more Forsaken.
Yeah.
He wants Kalendor because if he has Kalendor and he's killed Rand, he's Nabliss with one of the most powerful.
Done.
Yeah.
Series is over.
He is the, Nabliss and ruler of the world as the Dark One takes over.
Rand, to his credit, says in response something along the lines of, "Do you believe you can frighten me so easily, Forsaken?" And there's a small exchange where Bilal's like, "Oh God, he really thought that spells him on," which people keep saying to him, but Rand won't believe it.
Yeah, it's Ishmael. It's not the Dark One.
Yeah.
Baalzamon is, he's a little insane, so he might think he's the Dark One.
That's a possibility we've discussed before, which is believable.
Totally. Which might help convince Rand that he is the Dark One.
Yeah.
But he's not. He's a man.
And I've said this before, but so at the end of this, right, Ishmael gets stabbed, is laying dead on the ground, and Rand's like, "Haha, finally, I killed the Dark One. This is the third time, dude." Like, you're not getting it? You're still not getting it?
And every time Moiraine's like, nope. Nice try. Here she's like, yeah, you killed the Forsaken, but you killed a man.
Also, the Dark One does this thing where it doesn't really matter if you kill him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Dark One isn't killable.
Right. It's a force, not a creature.
Right. It's like killing gravity. It's like, do you really want to? I know it kills a lot of people who jump off buildings, but without it, we'd have some issues. So, Blade of Blackfire and Blade of Redfire. What a great visual image between these two.
Pretty sweet.
My question, is his Blade of Blackfire the true power?
I think so, yes.
I do too.
Rand is holding literal fire, and Bilal is fighting essentially with a tiny piece of the Dark One. "Take it and defend yourself if you can," Bilal's saying to Rand. He moved toward Rand as if to drive him back, toward Kalendor, but Rand raised his own hands. Sidon filled him, sweet rushing flow of the power, stomach-wrenching vileness of the taint, and he held a sword wrought from red flame, a sword with a heron mark on its fiery blade. He stepped into the forms Lan had taught him, till he flowed from one to the next as if in a dance. Parting the silk, water flows downhill, wind and rain, blade of black fire met blade of red fire, in showers of sparks, roars like white-hot metal shattering. Rand came back smoothly into a guard stance, trying not to let his sudden uncertainty show. A heron stood on the black blade, too, a bird so dark as to be nearly invisible. Once he had faced a man with a heron-marked blade of steel, and barely survived. He knew that he himself had no real right to the Blade Master's mark. It had been on the sword his father had given him, and when he thought of a sword in his hands, he thought of that sword. Once, he had embraced death, Warder had taught, but this time, he knew, his death would be final. Bilal was better than he with the sword, stronger, faster, a true Blade Master.
Rand kind of beat a Blade Master.
He did beat a Blade Master.
He used the Void, but he did it. He's like entry-level Blade Master. And I assume the one time he's talking about once he'd embraced death, that's when he got the stab wound at the end of
right. The Dragon Reborn. He let Ish stab him so he could stab him back.
Exactly.
And Bilal continues to goad him and move him back towards Kalendor and keeps reminding him if you take Kalendor, you have a chance. Just take it.
So here's a pretty significant line to me, which it tells us a lot about the Age of Legends. Do you remember when we took that tame sport called swords and learned to kill with it, as the old volumes said men once had? There's so many parts of that sentence that I need to talk about.
In the first age, called our age by some?
Mm-hmm. The fact that Lewis Theron and Bilal discovered how to kill with swords. Those two. I think when he says we, I think he's literally saying you and me. You as Lewis Theron and me as Bilal, which makes me think that Bilal is the ultimate blade master. He is probably the best swordsman of all time because he created the art of fighting with swords.
Him and Lewis Theron. And Bilal and Lewis Theron were friends. They were like buddies.
Totally.
Or colleagues, at least.
Do you remember why Bilal turned?
Jealousy.
Yeah.
He wanted to be as great as Lewis Theron, or thought of as great.
And so I don't think Bilal he's not just a true blade master. He is the true blade master.
Yes. And, I was trying to include Lewis Theron in that, but Lewis Theron does not include Rand al'Thor. Rand al'Thor is a farm boy.
Yes. No. And he hasn't had the crossover memories. He's had some training. He's definitely an excellent swordsman. He may be a blade master, but he's not Lewis Theron.
Being 6.5 feet tall with that fucking reach is also probably really helpful.
Yes.
And I kind of wanted to note this, that Rand has this thought where he does want to take Kalimdor. Like, he knows that it's probably his only chance of surviving this.
Sure.
And but he has the thought, like, because Rand is still not convinced that he's definitely the Dragon Reborn. No. He's been, like, backed into a corner where basically he felt like he had to say that he was the Dragon Reborn, but he doesn't actually believe it himself. And so he has this kind of moment where he's thinking, I'll just read this. If he raced to touch Kalimdor in truth, not in a dream, would his hand meet an invisible wall while Bilal cut him down from behind? So I think this is the real reason Rand isn't taking Kalimdor. He doesn't realize that Bilal's intent is to get Rand to take Kalimdor so he can take it from him.
Right.
That's the whole purpose of this encounter.
And that's a good point, because if that wasn't his purpose, he could have killed Rand at any point.
Yes.
He easily outmatches him with the sword. The only reason that Rand survives as long as he does is Bilal is literally playing with him.
Yeah.
In order to get him closer to the sword. I think he says here he's driving him in a spiral closer around the sword, closer and closer to it.
Mm-hmm. Methodically, deliberately, Bilal drove him back in a spiral that slowly tightened on Kalimdor. Shouts echoed among the columns. Screams. The clash of steel, but Rand barely heard. He and Bilal were no longer alone in the heart of the stone. Men in breastplates and rimmed helmets fought with swords against shadowy, veiled shapes that darted among the columns with short spears stabbing. Some of the soldiers formed a rank. Arrows flashing out of the dimness took them in the throat, the face, and they died in their line. Rand hardly noticed the fighting, even when men fell dead within paces of him. His own fight was too desperate. It took all of his concentration. Wet warmth trickled down his side. The old wound was breaking open.
I have to interrupt you. You looked up before I said that. Yeah. So tell me why I have to interrupt you.
So we've had this working theory that the wound in Rand's side doesn't heal because it's made with a true power. And it's always going to be there. It's stuck there. Nobody can take it out of him. And it responds to when the true power is being used near him or the presence of the Dark One, which is kind of the true power. And we were just talking about whether or not Bilal's sword is made of true power, while Rand's is made of a weave of sight-in fire.
Yes.
And that's almost definitely true if we're correct in our theory.
Agreed.
That Bilal's sword is making the wound in Rand's side resonate, and so every time that happens, it starts to bleed. It reopens.
I'm so glad I didn't have to say any of that.
Are you? Am I talking too much?
No, not at all. Okay, I'm totally like, sweet. I've trained you well.
I dig it. It works perfectly.
It really does.
And it's every time.
Yeah. We keep running into this. We were like, this is one of those things where we were looking out for it, and every time it happens, every time Rand is near the true power, his wound breaks open, and the reverse is true. Every time his wound breaks open, he's near the true power or the Dark One.
Whether he knows it or not.
Yeah, whether he knows it or not. And he has all these like, well, I'm exerting myself, so therefore it's breaking open, but that's not...
Which on the surface could almost make sense, but any wound should eventually heal. Even if you keep pulling it open, he's a 20-year-old guy. His body's in top-notch shape. There's no reason he shouldn't be able to heal.
And we never hear about it breaking open during training. Like, at one point, he fights 5 men at once.
Oh, good point.
Doesn't break open.
Camelin, right? When he starts paying people to test his skill.
He's trying to find somebody who can... He's testing his abilities. Mm-hmm. Because he doesn't have a land to fight anymore, so he needs 5 people.
Yeah. He stumbled suddenly, not seeing the dead man at his feet until he was lying on his back atop his flute case on the stone floor. Bilal raised his blade of black fire, snarling, "Take it. Take Kalendor and defend yourself. Take it or I will kill you now. If you will not take it, I will slay you." "No," in a woman's voice. Even Bilal gave a start at the command in that woman's voice. The Forsaken stepped back, out of the arc of Rand's sword, and turned his head, to frown at Moraine as she came striding through the battle, her eyes fixed on him, ignoring the screaming deaths around her. "I thought you were neatly out of the way, woman. No matter. You are only an annoyance, a stinging fly, a bite'em. I will cage you with the others, and teach you to serve the shadow with your puny powers." He finished with a contemptuous laugh, and raised his free hand. Moraine had not stopped or slowed while he spoke. She was no more than 30 paces from him when he moved his hand, and she raised both of hers as well. There was an instant of surprise on the Forsaken's face, and he had time to scream no. Then a bar of white fire, hotter than the sun, shot from the Aes Sedai's hands, a glaring rod that banished all shadows. Before it, Bilal became a shape of shimmering motes, specks, dancing in the light for less than a heartbeat, flecks, consumed before his cry faded.
She's weaving balefire from the moment she steps in.
Oh, yeah.
And so during that whole monologue, he's like, ba, 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 ba. She's like, yeah, I'm fucking with you. Like, and he...
I was hoping you'd talk about it for a while.
Yeah. Oh, you caught me monologuing. He's just like talking and shit, and she's like, yep, here's some balefire in your face. The second thing I want to talk about is his reaction. He had time to scream no.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Where this becomes really significant is with the death of Asmodean.
Okay.
We have no evidence that Asmodean was killed with balefire, other than he had time to say, you? No. And that is almost an exact reflection of Bilal's reaction to Moraine at this point. And the fact that those two descriptions are incredibly similar is the best evidence for the fact that Asmodean was killed by balefire.
Sure. I mean, he never comes back. I always just thought it was...
But he could also not come back because the Dark One said, you're a traitor. I wouldn't resurrect you.
I guess so, yeah.
But I do believe he was balefired by Grendel. Spoilers, Asmodean was balefired by Grendel.
It took us a long time to figure that out.
Yeah, that sentence, the fact that I can utter that sentence is something I was not sure I'd ever be able to say.
With certainty?
Yeah, with certainty.
Who killed Asmodean?
Yeah. I mean, it was the big debate.
I still almost fall back sometimes. When the first time I read through the series, I read it as Asmodean.
Yes, Aradia, I'm going to read your statement word for word with the proper emphasis because I agree with it 100%. In quotes, it's obvious. Fuck you, Robert Jordan. It's not obvious at all. It never was obvious before that book came out.
He said while folding his fingers together in glee. Or just...
What a dick.
He loved watching everyone squirm and not being able to figure it out.
He even says...
If you just read the text, it should be evident that no.
No. And I love to watch you squirm.
Yeah.
He got off on it.
There was silence in the chamber as that bar of light vanished. Silence, except for the moans of the wounded. The fighting had stopped dead. Veiled men, and men in breastplates alike, standing as if stunned. And then Moraine says, he was right about one thing. You've got to take Kalendor.
You're the Dragon Reborn. And now that I took out Bilal, you're clear to take it. Little does she know Ishmael is waiting in the wings. And by the wings, I mean a pocket dimension in Teleron Riyadh.
Yes, he's moving his body back and forth through Teleron Riyadh with the true power.
And so as soon as she's done telling Rand to take it, Ishmael strikes.
Whips of black lightning curled around her. She screamed as they lifted her, hurled her to slide along the floor like a sack until she came up against one of the columns.
And that takes her out for the fight.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing she survives that. She's gotten fucked up by a couple of the Forsaken at this point. When in the Eye of the World, she got hit pretty hard.
She kills 2?
Yes. Well, Bilal and
Lanfear. I mean, she kills Bilal forever.
Right.
And she kills Lanfear just for the one time.
And I mean, you could say technically Ishmael is the one who kills Lanfear, right?
Oh, right. Yes. He goes and rescues her, in quotes, which is killing her so that she can be then resurrected by the Dark
As
One.
Sidene, yeah. But she's alive. More
Sindain.
Sindain. I always want to say cyanide.
It's an anagram, isn't it? Wait.
It's close.
No, there's no I in Sindain.
So here's a question. If Bilal took Kalendor off of Rand, would Ishmael just be there to take Kalendor off of Bilal? You think that's what he was waiting for? He
Probably.
had that black lightning ready to go. So as soon as Rand fucking did something, he was like, blast everybody, and then jump in and take the sword himself.
I assume so.
Yeah.
He knew what Bilal was trying to do, so he just waited for Bilal to do it.
Why, oh why did she swallow the fly?
Rand stared up at where the lightning had come from. There was a deeper shadow up there, near the top of the columns, a blackness that made all other shadows look like noonday, and from it, 2 eyes of fire stared back at him. Slowly, the shadow descended, resolving into Baal-Zaman, clothed in dead black, like a Murdrol's black. Yet, even that was not so dark as the shadow that clung to him. He hung in the air, 2 spans above the floor, glaring at Rand with a rage as fierce as his eyes. Twice in this life I have offered you the chance to serve me living. Flames leapt in his mouth as he spoke, and every word roared like a furnace. Twice you have refused, and wounded me. Now you will serve the great lord of the grave in death. Die, Luce Theron Kinslayer. Die, Rand al'Thor. It is time for you to die. I take your soul. As Baal-Zaman put forth his hand, Rand pushed himself up, threw himself desperately toward Kalendor, still glittering and flashing in midair. He did not know whether he could reach it, or touch it if he did, but he was sure it was his only chance. Baal-Zaman's blow struck him as he leapt, struck inside him, a ripping and crumbling, tearing something loose, trying to pull a part of him away. Rand screamed. He felt as if he were collapsing, like an empty sack, as if he were being turned inside out. The pain in his side, the wound taken at Falma, was almost welcome, something to hang on to, a reminder of life. His hand closed convulsively on Kalendor's hilt. Pain in his side again.
Yeah.
Just throwing it out there.
The shadow that clung to him, that clings to Baal-Zaman, the presence of the true power, the Dark One, is that shadow that we see around him. And his, pulling of the true power.
We've seen that a bunch of times before.
He says, twice you refused me and wounded me, right? The first time he burned him in a gout of flame at the Eye of the World. The second time he put his sword through his chest.
Yeah.
Third time is now. And at that point, he puts Kalendor through his chest.
Rand's hand closes on Kalendor's hilt.
He's fighting Bilal. He doesn't reach for Kalendor. Fights him. The second Ishmael shows up and takes out Moraine, he's like, fuck, I need Kalendor.
Yeah.
He's like, there's no alternative. I cannot fight him on my own. I could fight Bilal on my own, but not
Ishmael.
He also thinks Ishmael is the Dark One himself.
That's true.
So that sort of explains why Bilal, who he has no idea who he is. He has no reaction to the name. He's like, oh, I can fight this dude. He's just a dude. Beelzemon, who he thinks is the Dark One, he pops up and he's like, fuck, I need Kalendor.
The one power surged through him, a torrent greater than he could believe. From Sidene into the sword, the crystal blade shone brighter than even Moraine's fire had. It was impossible to look at, impossible any longer to see that it was a sword. Only that light blazed in his fist. He fought the flow, wrestled with the implacable tide that threatened to carry him, all that was really him, into the sword with it. For a heartbeat that took centuries, he hung, wavering, balanced on the brink of being scoured away, like sand before a flash flood. With infinite slowness, the balance firmed. It was still as though he stood barefoot, on a razor's edge, above a bottomless drop, yet something told him this was the best that could be expected. To channel this much of the power, he must dance on that sharpness, as he had danced on the forms of the sword.
Kalendor has no buffer.
Right.
You can overdraw enough power to kill yourself. It is one of the few... I mean, Kalendor has a lot of issues. And this is the first time that Rand is pulling through it. So I kind of want to talk about those issues. Right. First of all, it is a TP.
Yeah.
Sa'angreal.
True power.
True power.
Just for anyone that doesn't realize what you're saying.
But second of all, it doesn't have the buffer. Third of all, it's a trap you can be taken control of. And fourth, it makes you crazy. It makes Rand think he can do anything.
Yes. But is that crazy, or is it just a human being having that much power?
No, it's crazy. Because with the Choden Call, he doesn't fall victim to that. And that's more power.
Yeah.
But it's buffered.
Something about the lack of a... Is buffer the word that is used for...
I mean, all Angreals have a buffer. And that's one of the reasons that Kalendor is flawed, is it does not have a buffer. It's flawed for a lot of reasons.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if the flaws aren't there in order to make it possible for it to be a true power Sa'angreal.
I like the theory. He turned to face Beelzemon. The tearing within him had ceased as soon as his hand touched Kalendor. Only an instant had passed, yet it seemed to have lasted forever. "You will not take my soul," he shouted. "This time, I mean to finish it once and for all. I mean to finish it now."
One of those two is going to die.
Yeah.
How the hell did Bilal think he could take Kalendor from Rand once he had it?
Just follow himself.
I guess. It just seems like...
Really? And you think nobody else is gunning for it, too? Like, Bilal thinks he's the only one who had this idea.
Right.
Right. Like, right. You know?
And not to mention, like, the second he touches it, in an instant, he's incredibly powerful.
Yes.
What are you going to do? Like, what do you have? He must have had something in reserve he was going to use on Rand once he picked up the sword.
Yes, Ravine, Balefire would work, I suppose.
Or is he just hoping that, like, that instant where he comes into balance is going to take too long? And in that instant, he was hoping to attack him?
Yeah, and I want to say it's a lot of overconfidence that we see with the Forsaken a bunch in the beginning, where they think that even channelers in this new age don't know anything.
Right.
Where, you know, Bilal was clearly proven wrong, but because in a second, you know, well, Bilal has already been Balefired, and then Ish in a minute here tries to Balefire Rand, and Rand cuts it in half.
Beelzemon tries to alter reality. So Beelzemon flees into Teleron-Riyadh.
Right.
And attempts to alter reality. And so I think the way that Rand is able to bring everything back into balance has a lot to do with the fact that the dragon is one with the land, and the land is one with the dragon.
Oh, yes. I talk more about it when we get there, but I felt that, yeah, it was very emblematic of his whole character arc through the series.
And not to mention balance being one of the most important aspects of this series.
Yes.
Balance between men and women, true power, one power. I mean, just balance is such an important aspect. And here Rand is bringing the world back into balance to fight.
Order, chaos, good and evil.
Ishmael, totally.
Beelzemon fled, man in shadow vanishing. For a moment, Rand stared, frowning. There had been a sense of folding as Beelzemon left, a twisting, as if Beelzemon had in some way bent what was. Ignoring the men staring at him, ignoring Moraine crumpled at the column base, Rand reached out, through Kalendor, and twisted reality to make a door to somewhere else. He did not know where, except that it was where Beelzemon had gone. "I am the hunter now," he said, as he stepped through. Did he just use a true power?
I don't think so.
He didn't make a gateway.
No. No, yes, he did. He twisted reality to make a door.
Okay.
The door is the gateway.
Okay.
As opposed to Beelzemon, who twists himself.
Right. I picture it as like a person twists, like as if the space were a circle around them and it was one of those fancy revolving doors that you only see in gigantic buildings.
Sure.
And you twist the reality around you so that you then are in a different place.
And I think he has the ability to sense reality changing.
Oh, and we've talked about this before. "I am the hunter now," he said, and stepped through. In a true power gateway, you don't step through.
No.
You move the world around you.
Yeah.
With a
You
one
tear
power
a hole,
gateway, you have to make a door and walk through it.
Right. So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Rand is traveling with the one power, not the true power.
Yeah. For a second there, when it said twisted, I thought.
But how does he feel the twisting? I think that's just his, Iradia's asking. I think that's his connection to the world as much as anything else.
I also kind of wanted to bring something up. I don't know if we've discussed this before or not, but Rand sees the true power around Beelzemon when he's using it.
In Teleron Riyadh, not in the real world.
He doesn't see it in the real world?
Nope. I mean, there's some darkness around him.
Yeah.
But he doesn't see the threads.
That's true.
The threads only appear in Teleron Riyadh.
Oh, you might be right. I'm
I
trying to
am
think of the...
Don't you might be right. Of course I'm fucking right. Fuck you.
You're not right about everything.
Yes, I am. No,
The stone shook under Egwene's feet. The stone shook. It rang. She caught her balance and stopped, listening. There was no more sound, no other tremor. Whatever had happened, it was over. She hurried on. A door of iron bars stood in her way, with a lock as big as her head. She channeled earth before she reached it, and when she pushed against the bars, the lock tore in half. Egwene is now in Teleran Riyadh, trying to break out of her prison cell. So she's breaking out of her prison cell in Teleran Riyadh in an effort to break out of the one in the real world.
Yeah, so let's talk about context. The three women are in the cell, shielded.
Yes.
Being guarded by one of the Black Oddjaw.
Yes. Who is sitting outside the door. So Egwene enters Teleran Riyadh, opens the door, and is able to see the woman of the Black Oddjaw.
Why is the stone shaking in Teleran Riyadh?
Excellent question. I wanted to ask that as well. It could be any number of reasons. It depends on exactly when this is happening. Later, Rand feels Perrin's hammer blow in the stone in the world of dreams. But that's very distinct, and it's described in such a way that it's definitely the hammer blow. But right now, I'm not sure...
I think it's part of the battle between Beelzemon and Rand. I think that this is...
It could be the columns falling.
Possibly. Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff that could be going on at this point. I mean, they're destroying a lot of shit.
Yes.
So exactly when in their fight is not specific.
Perrin makes the stone ring like a gong with his hammer.
Oh, that's what I think it is.
Matt
to be
blows
honest.
a hole in it, but in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And Rand and Ishmael are throwing around balefire. And,
right.
Yeah.
It's amazing there's
destroying
anything
tons
left
of
of the stone at the end of this battle.
It's being destroyed in two different realities.
And she's sensing part of that, but we really don't know what part.
Yeah. No, it's hard to say which explosion exactly. So she's walking down the hall, walking by the torture instruments and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, she saw something flicker just ahead of her. A shape, even less substantial than Joya Bayar? Bayar? Whatever. A shape even less substantial than Joya Bayar had been. It had been a woman, though. She was sure of that. A woman seated on a bench beside one of the cell doors. The image flickered into being again, and was gone. There was no mistaking that slender neck, and the pale, innocent-appearing face with its eyelids fluttering on the edge of sleep. Amiko Nagoyan was drifting toward sleep, dreaming of her guard duties, and apparently toying drowsily with one of the stolen terengrial. Egwene could understand that.
I think there's a bit of an addiction to Tel'aran'rhiod. I mean,
It's a powerful tool.
if I had to come up with a real world analogy, Tel'aran'rhiod is basically the internet of the Third Age.
I kind of like the analogy.
If you were it's like if you had a phone and you were on guard duty, would you not be messing around with it?
That's all I would be doing.
That's what Joya Bayar is doing here. She's fucking around with the internet while she's on guard duty.
She just has to sit there for a really long time.
Exactly.
So.
She's bored out of her mind, and she has this, communication device, and she's playing virtual reality. It is a bit weird that she's sort of halfway between the two realms.
She's flickering in and out. She's like sleeping and
I
waking.
guess we do see that with the wise ones. They're able to be like control how deep into Tel'aran'rhiod there are.
Yeah.
They're able to like sleep and like sleep enough that they can even like ride a horse or even talk a little bit and still be in the world of dreams.
And Hopper talks about this as well when he tries to tries to warn Perrin about being in Tel'aran'rhiod strongly.
But she's in there very, very weakly. She's sort of just nodding off and drifting in and channeling just a little bit of spirit.
Yeah. And we do see later when Egwene traps her in that state, the half state, she speaks to Mat.
Yeah. And she speaks to Egwene in the dream. So she's like aware of both worlds.
Kind of half and half.
Right. Which is what I put in my coffee.
She knew it was possible to cut a woman off from the true source, even if she had already embraced Saidar. But severing a weave already established had to be much harder than damming a flow before it began. She set the patterns of the weaving, readied them, making the threads of spirit much stronger, this time thicker and heavier, a denser weave with a cutting edge like a knife.
I believe if she had not been channeling, she would have been stilled.
From the force?
From the knife edge. Because here she talks about how the knife gets blunted by the active flows. If the knife hadn't been blunted, that would have cut Joy off from the true source forever.
That sounds about right to me.
And we see that with
the
Moghedien and Nynaeve's fight.
Oh, yeah.
Where they're trying to cut each other off permanently, and when Nynaeve finally succeeds, the fact that Moghedien is channeling blunts the edge of her severing weave and only allows her to cut her off, but not permanently.
I was thinking of the box when this is a bit different, but Rand is shielded.
Yeah.
And when he blows the shield off, like cuts through it and rips it apart, he stills like 3 people.
Well, he crushes, so there's 3 nodes that have been tied off and 3 nodes that are still being actively controlled. Mm-hmm. When he crushes the nodes that are being actively controlled, he stills the women who are holding those. The ones that have been tied off, obviously they're not connected anymore, so he just severs the weave.
I'm imagining like a giant pliers crushing a pipe with water flowing through it, just closing it.
Oh, good visual.
The wavering shape of the Dark Friend appeared again, and Egwene struck out with flows of air and spirit. For an instant, something seemed to resist the weaving of spirit, and she forced it with all her might. It slid into place. Amico Nagoyan screamed. It was a thin sound, barely heard, as faint as she herself was, and she seemed almost like a shadow of what Joya Bayar had been. Yet the bonds woven of air held her. She did not vanish again. Terror twisted the Dark Friend's lovely face. I really like the contrast of the word terror and lovely in that sentence.
Mm-hmm. Terror twisted the Dark Friend's lovely face. It's a great sentence.
Yeah. For a moment, she thought of what to do next. Then she stepped out of the dream.
I don't know. I think this is a bit of a... Why doesn't she... When she gets shielded, she should stop channeling... What affects her in the dream affects her in the real world. So if she's shielded in the dream, she should be shielded in the real world.
I want to say because she's only partly there, it only partly works.
All right.
Nothing to back it up.
All right. Yep. I don't have anything.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I should also say that this is like... I don't know that we ever see this again or anything quite like this. No. So it would be really hard to say for sure why things work the way they work because we only have one example, So it's really hard to talk about it with any amount of confidence.
I'm sure Robert Jordan had justification for this in his head, but I can't figure it out.
Whoever is out there, Nynaeve said, screamed a few moments ago, but nothing else has happened. Did he find a way out?
Egwene has a bit of a error in logic. She says Amiko is bound and the door is open.
Yes.
The door is not open.
No.
You can affect people, but you can't affect things.
Right.
And so you can bind Amiko, but you cannot open the door. That's what you need Matt for.
I'm nodding. Yeah, Egwene thinks they should be able to walk out, and she tries, but...
Well, and they are still cut off. She says the shield is different now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why is it different? Is it partially in the world of dreams? Because Amiko is partially in the world of dreams?
Yes.
Is it tied off because Amiko can't? That to me is very weird. Why is the shield changed but not...
Tying is an act. Like, it's a thing that you have to do.
Right.
I don't know. But I want to say it's like a vague reflection of where Amiko is, because she's not here, but she is here.
So I have to think that the shield is partially in the world of dreams with Amiko.
Yeah.
Which is so weird. We have an interaction of the One Power, the real world, and Teleron Riyadh. And
All together.
They're all interacting in this weird way that I've never really fully figured out how it all works.
The invisible wall was still there. It shimmered now. There were moments when she almost thought she could feel the true source beginning to fill her with the power. Almost.
It's like in that flicker when she's like passing out versus awake versus passing out versus awake. Like in the time that she's in the world of dreams, you would be able to draw the power, but it's so fast that she's in and out, in and out, in and out. And every time she's out, the shield comes back. You lose your connection. And then she's in the dream. You gain your connection back. And then she's out and you lose your connection. So there's this like, I almost feel like it's this flickering between the two that prevents them from embracing the true source.
And so, because they only have one option, sending Egwene back to Teleron Riyadh, she tries again.
Right. Because...
Which, I mean... Luckily, Matt comes, but I feel like Egwene's only option is to go back to Teleron Riyadh and kill Amiko. She has to murder her.
That is the only option.
She has to die. Otherwise...
Because once Amiko dies, the shield is gone, and then they can channel their way out of the room.
Yeah. They can blow the door off.
So Matt's arrival essentially keeps her from being a murderer.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, I exaggerate often and say murder because it's just more brutal than kill.
Right.
But it's hardly murder at this point. I mean, it's self-defense.
Yeah, it really is. If someone's holding you prisoner,
killing's killing, but
yeah,
they're gonna do bad stuff to these women if they don't get the hell out of there.
So I do feel like the women could have gotten out, but I feel like Egwene would have been pretty traumatized over killing a helpless woman.
Yeah, and there's other stuff, but not stuff that Egwene knows how to do.
Right. Like, what other stuff?
Like, pull Amiko all the way into the world of dreams. Or, like, break her mind, stuff like that.
You're talking dreamer stuff, not Aes Sedai stuff.
Yes, strictly dreamer stuff, because she's shielded, so there's nothing, really, that can be done.
Right.
Perspective switch. As Egwene tries to go back to sleep.
That's interesting. That happens at exactly a page break, so it's not in my ebook.
What?
It looks like just another paragraph to me.
The wide door of iron bars stood open, and the room beyond seemed empty of life, but Matt entered cautiously. Sandar was still out in the hall, trying to peer both ways at once, certain that a High Lord or maybe 100 defenders or so would appear at any moment. There were no men in the room now, and by the looks of the half-eaten meals on the long table, they had left hurriedly, no doubt because of the fighting above. He moves in, down the hall, looks at the torture instruments and shutters, and then Sandar says, "Stop." Like, that woman sitting there, she's an Aes Sedai. She's one of the ones that took your friends, and she'll kill us both.
And this is one of Matt's weak points. Is he sees a pretty woman who looks helpless.
Yeah.
And cannot.
It's like, nah, Sandar, it's just a sleeping cutie. Don't worry about it.
What? She's fine. He has a weakness for women. He does not see women as dangerous. I mean, he ends up dating a dark friend.
Oh, right. He fools around with the
Aiel woman.
The Maiden of the Spear.
Yeah. And she turns out to be
Tries to
a
kill
dark
him.
friend. Yep. Melindra.
Matt froze in the middle of a step, staring at the woman. He remembered Moraine hurling balls of fire. He wondered if he could deflect a ball of fire with his quarterstaff. He wondered if his luck extending to outrunning Aes Sedai. "Help me," she said faintly. Her eyes still looked nearly asleep, but the pleading in her voice was fully awake. "Help me, please." Matt blinked. She still had not moved a muscle below her neck. Cautiously, he stepped closer, waving to Sandar to stop his groaning about her being Aes Sedai. She moved her head to follow him. No more than that. A large iron key hung at her belt. For a moment he hesitated. "Aes Sedai," Sandar said. "Why doesn't she move?" Swallowing, he eased the key free as carefully as if he were trying to take a piece of meat from a wolf's jaws. She rolled her eyes toward the door, beside her, and made a sound like a cat that had just seen a huge dog come snarling into the room and knew there was no way out. He did not understand it, but as long as she did not try to stop him opening the door, he did not care why she just sat there like a stuffed scarecrow.
It's interesting that the weaves of air in the world of dreams are holding her in the physical world.
Yes. I was thinking about that more as I was reading this again, and she can move her head. And she
Yeah.
can move her mouth.
Well, I mean, that's just how, when you wrap someone up in the weaves of air, you just control the joints.
Mm-hmm. And what is done to your body in Teleran Riyadh is done to your body in the real world, but not the opposite.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess this makes sense to me. I like the idea of like a boa constrictor of weaves of air. That's a good one, Ravine.
Tears leaked from the woman's eyes, but there was only one way to find out what was behind the door. I skipped a bit.
Right, and if it's terrifying this woman, who's evil, despite the fact that Matt can't figure this out.
He's worried that it's a
Right.
Myrddraal or something. Like, why is she so afraid that he's going to open the door?
Which tells you a little bit about just how terrifying Nynaeve is.
I thought you were going to say, no, that makes perfect sense. Yes, and that is also funny. But I'm just imagining Matt like with his arm all the way out, just enough to put the key in there, and he there's a clear sentence where he like leans his staff up against the door and he turns the key in the lock and he whips it open. And it's the girls, but he's like ready to run, and it says it's literal. It says that he's ready to turn around and sprint, as if that would help if it were a Myrddraal. But
I mean, I feel like that's the appropriate reaction to seeing Nynaeve in a cage. Open the door and fucking run. You don't want to be caught up in that backlash.
you're welcome. Bye.
See ya.
Matrim Cawthon, Nynaeve said, sounding shocked. "What under the light are you doing here?"
Rescuing your ass.
"I came to bloody rescue you," he said. "Burn me if I expected to be greeted as if I came to steal a pie. You can tell me why you look as if you've been fighting bears later, if you want. If a queen can't walk, I'll just carry her on my back. There are Aiel all over the stone, or near enough, and either they are killing the bloody defenders, or the defenders are killing them, but whichever way it is, we had better get out of here while we bloody can, if we can." I imagine he says it like that.
That was a really good reading of that sentence.
Thank you. "Mind your language," Nynaeve told him.
And so this is the source of so much angst between Matt and Nynaeve and Egwene and Elaine. Because he's like, dude, I came and rescued you.
Right? Why does everybody have to be a jerk? Why can't they just be like, "Cool, thanks, let's get out of here"?
Yeah.
And then it wouldn't have to be a thing.
The women didn't want to be rescued. They wanted to escape on their own.
So much pride.
They couldn't have done it without killing Amico.
Mm-hmm.
Have the women really killed anybody yet? Has Nynaeve, Elaine, or Egwene killed anyone?
Nynaeve's killed a bunch of people. Sean Chan.
Oh, Sean Chan. That's right.
I don't think Elaine or Egwene have killed anyone.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Nynaeve as the only killer here. Myrddraal don't count. And I mean, I guess the other thing we have to talk about is, like, Matt rescuing you? Like, Matt? Like, the idea that Matt would be the one that shows up. Like, Perrin, okay. Rand, okay. But Matt, he's just a rogue who doesn't do anything that's important. And, like, why would he be the one rescuing us? It doesn't make any sense. Why Matt? They don't even react to it like a rescue. They react to Matt like he's just what he is, which is a rogue who fucking makes trouble for the women.
Yes.
I feel like this goes back to, is it Min who says, I had an uncle who died rescuing children from a fire?
I thought it was Swan.
Or was it Swan? Oh, it was Swan. Thank you, Jesus.
Just over here praising Jesus.
I never thought I would say thank you, Jesus, in my life. But,
so many times.
Jesus Ferengi.
Yeah, it's Swan. And she says something like,
Yeah.
I think
right.
you're like that man, aren't you? Uncle Juan, great. Good job, Aradia. Thank you.
And he says he's not like that.
I would never have been able to remember that.
Yeah. And he says he's not like that, but he's exactly like that. Swan nails him to a T.
Mm-hmm. Matt gets a short briefing on, because all the women realize that Sandar is standing behind Matt, and they're like, oh,
that son of a bitch.
You.
Yeah. Also, he got compelled.
They
know he got compelled. Deal with it.
To credit Nynaeve, Sandar sees them, looks at Matt, explains briefly, apologizes, and then Nynaeve says, Leandrin has vile tricks, Master Sandar. Perhaps you are not entirely to blame. We can apportion guilt later.
But they suck at it. They still blame him. They still think of him as a traitor long after he's made up for it.
And Nynaeve punches Amico in the face, even though she can't move. Fine, I'm okay with that.
Nynaeve throwing a punch? That never happens. Except it always happens.
Blood and bloody ashes, Matt growled. What do you mean hitting a woman who's just sitting there? I don't think she could even move. And they all just look at him. You do not understand anything, Matrim Coffin.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Egwene said in a tight voice. Until you do understand, Nynaeve said in even tighter, I suggest you keep your opinions to yourself. Elaine contented herself with a glare that made him think his mother was going to cut a switch. What I understand is that I got you out of something you couldn't get yourselves out of, and you all have as much gratitude as a bloody Terran ferryman with a toothache. You are right, Nynaeve said, and his boots suddenly hit the floor so hard his teeth jarred. But he could move again. As much as it pains me to say it, Matt, you are right.
They couldn't tie him up in air until Nynaeve knocked out the woman.
Oh, that is true.
Yeah.
They couldn't do anything until they knocked out Amico. I like how later Matt's like, yo, Sandar, what the fuck? Like, couldn't you help me out back there? And he was like, I saw what happened to you for opening your mouth. You think I'm stupid?
I'm not jumping into the meat grinder. Thank you very much.
And they're all the women are like, well, we're going to go do battle. Find Leandrin and skin her and, whatever other number of things. And they're all storming off, and Matt's just still standing there yelling, well, I'm not going to a battle. I'm leaving right now. I'm not going to help you anymore. And then he runs after him.
And he helps him. Nynaeve merely sniffed. In or out?
I think it's out.
Oh, I think it's an in.
Really?
Yep.
That is more of I think in is sniff. Out is more like a blow. I wouldn't call it a snort.
All right. Aradia says in. Ravine says out. Christine says out.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think it's the
Devin
dismissive
Satanist says in.
Blow out. Wow, this is 50-50. And perspective switch. Perrin. Perrin strode down the halls of the stone grimly, searching for some sign of Fail. He had rescued her twice more now, breaking her out of an iron cage, once, much like the one that had held the Aiel and Remen, and once, breaking open a steel chest with a falcon worked on its side. Both times, she had melted into air after saying his name.
So he's done 3 total rescues.
Yes.
This is the 4th.
4 is the charm, I guess.
That's what they say.
It's what I just said, so whatever. Hopper trotted by his side, sniffing the air. As sharp as Perrin's nose was, the wolves was sharper. It had been Hopper who had led them to the chest.
Aradia and I both ask, is Fail experiencing each of these 4 rescues?
I wondered that myself, if they're just illusions. She does say his name, which is a personal touch, but it's not necessarily...
I think she's there all 4 times. I think she experiences all 4 rescues.
Also, I really want to say out loud, Fire Phoenix typed, Perrin strode grimly like the first for the next 11 books. Strode grimly forward.
Yep.
Yeah, he sure did.
I mean, I think just the way she talks about Perrin after this means she experienced. I mean, certainly when he's cut apart by falcons, she understands that he suffered that for her.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of the previous 3 experiences she saw, but I feel like enough to like know that Perrin is incredibly dedicated to her. I mean, this really is the foundation of their relationship. This is when they go from Zareen to Fail, from Perrin to my wolf.
Yes.
This is the beginning of their relationship.
There's just a lot of BDSM jokes happening with cages and Perrin getting beaten up and Fael really liking that. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not saying it. Actually, I did say a little bit of it in the Discord, but
there was also
I'm just
the
joining
scene
it.
where she was naked and chained.
Yep. And it's certainly a tense moment, for lack of a better term. A tense moment that suddenly ends. Oh, she could make him howl. Please cut me reading that out loud, but that's a good one.
Unleash the wild wolf. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that between Saldean farm girls and Perrin's wolf-like nature, there's not some serious animal sex going on between the two.
Oh my God, the Discord right now. I can't handle it.
There's some dirty talk going on in Discord.
I'm not even going to read that out loud. But excellent puns.
All right, I've got to read "Pound Me Like Your Anvil, Blacksmith."
Oh,
That's
was the
so
one that
good. That's
made
so
me
good.
laugh, but I wasn't going to read. Striding grimly forward. Hopper had turned back to look at him. You are here too strongly, young bull. The flesh weakens. You do not care to hold on to it enough. Soon flesh and dream will die together. Find her, Perrin said. That is all I ask. Find Fael. Yellow eyes met yellow eyes. The wolf turned and trotted to the doors. Beyond here, young bull. Perrin reached the doors and pushed. They did not budge. There seemed to be no way to open them. No handles, nothing to grip. There was a tiny pattern worked into the metal, so fine his eyes almost did not see it. Falcons. Thousands of tiny falcons. She has to be here. I do not think I can last much longer. With a shout, he swung his hammer against the bronze. It rang like a great gong. Again he struck, and the peal deepened. A third blow, and the bronze doors shattered like glass. Within 100 paces from the broken doors, a circle of light surrounded a falcon chained to a perch. Darkness filled all the rest of that vast chamber. Darkness, and faint rustlings as of hundreds of wings.
When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a brass door.
He took a step into the room, and a falcon stooped out of the murk, talons scoring his face as it passed. He threw an arm across his eyes. Talons tore at his forearm, and staggered toward the perch. Again and again the birds came, falcons diving, striking him, tearing him, but he lumbered on with blood pouring down his arms and shoulders. That one arm protected his eyes he had fixed on the falcon on the perch. He had lost the hammer. He did not know where, but he knew that if he went back to search, he would die before he found it. As he reached the perch, the slicing talons drove him to his knees. He peered up under the arm of the falcon on the perch, and she stared back, with dark, unblinking eyes. The chain that held her leg was fastened to the perch with a tiny lock shaped like a hedgehog. He seized the chain with both hands, careless of the other falcons, that now became a whirlwind of cutting talons around him, and with his last strength snapped it. Pain and the falcons brought darkness. He opened his eyes to stinging agony, as if his face and arms and shoulders had been sliced with 1,000 knives. It did not matter. Fael was kneeling over him, those dark, tilted eyes filled with worry, wiping his face with a cloth already soaked in his blood. "My poor Perrin," she said softly. "My poor blacksmith. You were hurt so badly." With an effort that cost more pain, he turned his head. This was a private dining room in the Star, and near one leg of the table lay a wooden carving of a hedgehog, broken in half. Bail, he whispered to her, my falcon.
The beginning of their relationship. How long do you think it is before he gets healed by Moraine? She's unconscious from Black Lightning.
Probably a while, but, he's huge. Just saying, there's a lot of meat to get cut.
It kind of reminds me of when Rand fights the mirrors and shatters them and gets, cuts all over his body.
All slices and stuff, but it's all, I kind of feel like on the surface. He's not going to bleed out. He's shredded.
He just probably looks like a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like this is really when the two of them start the relationship. My blacksmith, my falcon.
Mm-hmm. And perspective switch.
Back to Rand. So we've gone Rand, Egwene, Matt, Perrin, Rand.
Yes.
In this chapter.
Rand was still in the heart of the stone, but it was different. There were no men fighting here, and no dead men. No one at all but himself. Abruptly the sound of a great gong rang through the stone. Then again, and the very stones beneath his feet resonated. A third time the booming came, but cut off abruptly, as if the gong had shattered. All was still. So that's Perrin. The 3 strikes.
Oh,
and they're both in
a good one.
Tel'aran'rhiod.
Yeah, the gong. I wonder if, going back to Egwene, I wonder if the shaking has to do with him breaking open those doors.
I wondered it too.
Yeah.
But she only feels the one explosion.
Right.
Which doesn't necessarily mean that she's not feeling that explosion. If she entered at the right moment, she might have only felt the final one.
No idea.
Yeah, no, there's no way to know. Because there's a bunch of more explosions in a second here. Where is this place? He wondered. More important, where is Baal Zaman? As if to answer him, a blazing shaft like the one Moraine had made shot out of the shadows among the columns, straight toward his chest. His wrist twisted the sword instinctively. It was instinct, as much as anything else, that made him loose flows from Sidene into Kalendor, a flood of the power that made the sword blaze brighter, even, than that bar streaking at him. His uncertain balance between existence and destruction wavered. Surely, that torrent would consume him. The shaft of light struck the blade of Kalendor, and parted on its edge, forking to stream past on either side. He felt his coat singe from its near passing.
It's just a weave.
Smelled the wool beginning to burn. Behind him, the 2 prongs of frozen fire, of liquid light, struck huge red stone columns. Where they struck, stone ceased to exist, and the burning bars bored through to other columns, serving those instantaneously as well. There's an error in my book.
Severing.
No, yeah, but in my book it definitely says serving.
Whoa, wait. No, it says severing in the ebook.
Yep, well.
We found another error, folks.
Well, it can't really be from 91. Is this really that old?
It might be. It's got the original cover.
Yeah. Well.
And you destroyed it to make this podcast. You son of a bitch.
There's thousands more.
My question, if they were not in Tel'aran'rhiod, could he still split the balefire? Or does it split simply because he thinks it should split?
I got nothing. Aradia's upset that wool burns when balefire touches it, which, yes, makes no sense.
No, it doesn't really.
But this is Tel'aran'rhiod. And at this point, Rand believes that balefire is made of fire. Somehow.
Meh.
Not nodding. Okay.
I think that perhaps the balefire effect might not have been totally finalized at this point. I mean, this is the first book that balefire appears in.
Yeah.
It doesn't appear in book 1 or 2. And he may have come up with the word and the fact that it was a column of fire without really creating the backwards in time stuff. So.
And Rand parts the balefire that parts around him, and then he swings Kalendor, and I imagine how do I describe it? A horizontal
boomerangish looking thing?
Yes.
It's a very anime image to me.
Yeah, me too.
That when,
he swings the sword and shoots a thing with the force of the mat. I don't know.
Up, down, down, A, B, start.
Sonic boom! Or something.
But yeah, I mean, I guess my question really comes down to, is Kalendor Quendiar?
Or can Kalendor just do that? Because it's a very special item of power. Quendiar is phonetic. Queldiller is pretty funny, though.
We've seen a couple of items that have survived Balefire. Any Quendiar item, the male sad bracelets, and Kalendor.
That sounds right.
I think we see, like, the throne room gets Balefired, and there's a bunch of Quendiar there, and it, like, falls out of the beam. It's like everything else is gone, and so the Quendiar items just go ting, 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 ting. Can we just talk about Quendiar? Like, if the wheel rotates over and over and over again an infinite number of times, and Quendiar can never be destroyed, shouldn't the world be, like, overwhelmed with Quendiar?
I guess it depends on how much was made. And it can just, like, be ground down back into the center of the earth. Not that it would be destroyed.
No.
But it would just be, like, sunk forever deep within the earth, you know? Possibly working its way back up again one day. Like any stone or whatever continent is eventually chewed up and spat back out.
So Fire Phoenix says the seals crumbled, but that's because they had the
DO.
The true power directed at them. The true power is capable of destroying Quendiar. It's the only thing that is.
Yeah. And the Dark One is essentially the true power.
Yes.
They're sort of the same thing. I was going to read little bits of this, but basically, as Rand chases Baelzamon through the heart of the stone, he keeps shifting reality, and I'll read, like, little bits, but Myrddraal and Trollocs leapt out of thin air, huge bestial shapes and eyeless faces distorted with a rage to kill, in hundreds, so they jammed the hall before him and behind, scythe-like swords and blades of deadly black steel seeking his blood. Without knowing how, he turned them to vapor that parted before him, and vanished. The air around him suddenly became choking soot, clogging his nostrils, shutting off breath, but he made it fresh air again, a cool mist. Flames leapt from the floor beneath his feet, spurted from the walls, the ceiling, furious jets that flashed tapestries and rugs, tables and chests to wisps of ash, flung ornaments and lamps ahead of them as drops of molten burning gold. He smashed the fires flat, hardened them into a red glaze on the rock. And this just happens like dozens more times, basically, as Ishmael turns the air into the water, and then he makes it so that there's no air at all, and then, it's
Basically, Baelzamon alters reality, and Rand brings Tel'aran'rhiod back into alignment with reality, using the one power.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm going to go back to the debate. Is using the one power in Tel'aran'rhiod real? And here's where I'd say his access in the flesh to Kalendor allows him to, not to mention the fact that he is one with the land, that incredible amount of power helps him bring Tel'aran'rhiod back into sync with reality. And I think power is real in Tel'aran'rhiod, if I have to come down on the side. I think they're two, we talk about the constants. You have the Creator, the Dark One, Tel'aran'rhiod, and that is essentially one power, true power, and Tel'aran'rhiod. Those are the three things that are real in the world. And I think that the one power exists even in Tel'aran'rhiod.
Yeah.
And I think this is evidence for it.
Or is it that because he's holding Kalendor, he believes he can?
Nope.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nope. Nope. Stop.
Endless debate there.
It is totally. Yeah, you can't stop it. Like, I can't. Or does he
shit,
believe?
a radio disagrees with me. So that happens a bunch.
Yeah. He made right without being aware how.
Yes. Vaguely he knew that in some way he had brought things back into natural balance, forced them into line with his own dance down that impossibly thin divide between existence and nothingness. But that knowledge was distant. All his awareness lay in the pursuit, the hunt, the death that must end it.
And then in the next paragraph, I want to talk about those black lines.
Okay.
Because we only see them a few times. And it's basically whenever we see a Forsaken in Tel'aran'rhiod, we see black lines coming off of them, connecting that particular Forsaken to the Dark One.
Yes.
And he severs it twice. He severs it once in this fight with Baelzamon, and then again with Asmodean.
That's right.
And when he fights Asmodean, he says, I cut you off from the Dark One.
Mm-hmm.
Which to me means here he cuts Baalzamon off from the Dark One.
Yes. Yeah.
How does the Dark One resurrect Baalzamon if he's cut off from him?
Do you have to be connected to the Dark One to be resurrected?
That's my question.
I mean, I would have to say not. If severing the string of darkness that connects Ishmael to the Dark One cuts him off from the Dark One, and the Dark One couldn't resurrect him. So there's too many assumptions in this. Never mind.
The connection between the connections that Rand is seeing is the connection to the true power.
That's what I think. That
not
it's the flow.
necessarily the connection to the Dark One. The Dark One is still able to. Well, basically, once you're dead, the Dark One has a split second to resurrect you, whether you're connected to him or not. And that only fails when you get Baal fired. And
Right.
then you've already been dead, so he doesn't have that split second. So people are saying he doesn't want to resurrect Asmodean because of his weakness.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that, but I also think Asmodean was Baal fired. So I don't think he could have, even if he wanted to. He just didn't want to.
I agree with both of those. I don't think the Dark One would have, but I always assumed that he was Baal fired.
Yeah, it's a twofer. Asmodean's not coming back for a couple of reasons. He's toast. The next thing I really wanted to talk about
Yeah.
was the surety that holding Kalendor, he could do anything.
Yes.
Anything. That's the insanity of Kalendor.
He does try to. He sort of brings a girl back to life.
He attempts to bring a dead body back to life of
Yeah.
a small girl. But that's later in the stone.
Yes.
In the next...
He does it in every physical way.
Yeah. But
That doesn't.
it's an automaton. It's not...
Right.
you
It's a
can't-
zombie.
Right.
Rand makes a zombie.
Basically. And he does it because of the insanity of Kalendor.
Mhm.
And that is not something he would normally do, except for the fact that Kalendor has flaws.
Nodding. And then he was in the heart of the stone again, stalking through the rubbled gap that had been a wall. Some of the columns hung like broken teeth now, and Baalzamon backed away from him, eyes burning, shadow cloaking him. Black lines like steel wires seemed to run off from Baalzamon into the darkness, mounding around him, vanishing into unimaginable heights and distances within that blackness. "I will not be undone," Baalzamon cried. His mouth was fire. His shriek echoed among the columns. "I cannot be defeated. Aid me." Some of the darkness shrouding him drifted into his hands, formed into a ball so black it seemed to soak up even the light of Kalendor. Sudden triumph blazed in the flames of his eyes.
True power from the Dark One?
Directly.
Yeah.
I think that's what's happening. Because he even seems a little surprised.
Yeah.
When
Aid me. That's
yeah.
definitely him being like
Begging
Dark
for
One.
more.
Totally. And so I feel like Dark One gives him a bit of his own essence.
Extra. More than he's usually allowed to have.
Totally.
I think is what's happening. "You are destroyed," Rand shouted. Kalendor spun in his hands. Its light roiled the darkness, severed the steel-black lines around Baalzamon, and Baalzamon convulsed. As if there were two of him, he seemed to dwindle and grow larger at the same time. "You are undone."
Okay. Dwindling and growing larger at the same time. By cutting Baalzamon off from the Dark One, the part of Baalzamon that is connected to the Dio dwindles. But the part that is a person, separate from the Dark One, grows. Why does cutting him off from the Dio cause him to both dwindle and grow?
I don't know what that means. "You are undone." Rand plunged the shining blade into Baalzamon's chest. Baalzamon screamed, and the fires of his face flared wildly. "Fool," he howled. "The great Lord of the Dark can never be defeated."
You're not the great Lord of the Dark. You can definitely be defeated.
Yes.
Most likely with a sword through your chest.
Rand pulled Kalendor's blade free as Baalzamon's body sagged and began to fall, the shadow around him vanishing. And suddenly, Rand was in another heart of the stone, surrounded by columns still whole, and fighting men screaming and dying.
I wonder how much of Rand's... Somehow, he connected his trip into Teleron-Riyadh in the flesh to Baalzamon, and once Baalzamon died...
He moved right back.
He moved right back into the real world.
I want to say that, we know Rand can do things with the one power he really doesn't have any right to. He has no training, no nothing, but he does like really complex things with it sometimes, particularly when he's holding Kalendor. He does really amazing things that we really don't ever see anywhere else, except for when Rand is holding Kalendor. You know, I think of it as like the intelligent lightning storm that moves up and down the halls of the tower hunting Trollocs.
Sure. When
he brings the little girl back to life, in quotations, he can't put her soul back in her body, but he does everything else. So he does things that nobody else can do.
Yes.
And I mean, he is holding one of the most powerful Sangreal ever made, so that makes sense. So I think that, kind of along the lines of what you were saying before about what he's doing to Elran Riyadh, he's doing things with ease that most channelers could never dream of doing.
Yes.
And instinctually, he's what he wants to happen, he does.
How much of that is his connection with the land? How much of that is his embrace of Kalendor? How much of that is his Tavernness? How much of that is his the ability to access the true power?
Yeah.
That he's not even aware of at this point.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlapping factors here. But Kalendor in the heart of Ishmael worked when Power Forged Sword didn't.
Yes.
And when Fire didn't. But Kalendor finally kills Baal-Zaman.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to see his body.
Just a regular stabbing. Well, I think
just
the point you're trying to make is that
stabbing.
It's not a regular stabbing.
It's
this
not
is
a regular
special
weapon.
Stabbing.
It's a special stabbing. Yeah. Because even a power-forged weapon melted in the fires of the true power that is Baal-Zaman's heart.
Yeah.
But Kalendor stood up to it. Perhaps the fact that it was a true power Sangreal is the only reason why it was able to stand up to the true power raging in Baal-Zaman's heart and
That's
actually
true.
kill him.
If you can pull the true power through it, then how could the true power destroy it?
Can't. It's the only weapon that could have killed him.
I think you're right. Rand pulled Kalendor's blade free as Baal-Zaman's body sagged and began to fall, the shadow around him vanishing. And suddenly, Rand was in another heart of the stone, surrounded by columns still whole, and fighting men screaming and dying, veiled men and men in breastplates and helmets. Moraine still lay crumpled at the base of a red stone column, and at Rand's feet lay the body of a man, sprawled on its back, with a hole burned through the chest. He might have been a handsome man in his middle years, except that, where his eyes and mouth should have been, were only pits from which rose tendrils of black smoke. I have done it, he thought. I have killed Baal-Zaman, killed Shaitan. I have won the last battle. Light, I am the Dragon Reborn, the breaker of nations, the breaker of the world. No, I will end the breaking, end the killing. I will make it end. He raised Kalendor above his head. Silver lightning crackled from the blade, jagged streaks arcing toward the great dome above. Stop, he shouted. The fighting ceased. The men stared at him in wonder, over black veils, from beneath the rims of round helmets. I am Rand al'Thor, he called, so his voice rang through the chamber. I am the Dragon Reborn. Kalendor shone in his grasp. One by one, veiled men and helmeted, they knelt to him, crying, "The dragon is reborn. The dragon is reborn." That chapter ended on page 666 in my copy of...
I knew that. Yeah.
Yeah?
666, totally. So, as we are wont to do occasionally, I'm just going to thank the patrons who have been donating over the last... Really, it's been about a month, I think, since we've thanked the patrons.
Yeah?
So I'm going to hit everyone who donated from August 31st on. So if you donated from August 31st through September 26th and you haven't heard your name, let me know.
Is the first one Regina?
I believe so.
Thank you, Regina.
And we may have thanked a few of these people twice, so I'm just overlapping a little bit just in case I forget somebody.
You guys deserve to be thanked at least 3 times.
At least. If you've been thanked 0 times, I've made a mistake. If you've been thanked once, I'm on point. If you've been thanked twice, congratulations. You won a bit of a lottery.
And like Seth said, if you
Said
haven't
Seth.
been
I like that.
if you haven't been thanked at all, please send us an email or hit us up on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. We'll figure it out and get to you.
And if you send me one and I say okay and then I forget to do it, send me another one. Things get busy. I forget stuff.
Unless you really don't care, then
Right.
Do whatever you
That's
want.
fine. So thank you, Regina. We also have Thomas Casey,
Thank you, Thomas.
Tyson,
Thank you, Tyson.
Mimi Kook, Khuc,
Kook. Thanks, Mimi.
Judith upped her pledge,
We appreciate you, Judith.
Obscure upped his pledge.
You're a friend of ours.
We see you on Discord quite
I know that
frequently.
guy.
I know you. Evan Mack upped his pledge.
Thank you, Evan Mack, Gaelic last name that I can't pronounce, and I'm sorry.
I just skipped it. I didn't even bring it up.
I really ought to be able to, but
Devin Moore pledged a good amount. Thank you, Devin.
thank you, Devin.
Thank you, Otis.
Thank you, Otis.
Christina Johnson.
We appreciate you, Christina.
Justin, no last name. You pledged just in time to be thanked.
Just in time, Justin.
Jesus upped her pledge. Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Jesus.
I mostly love it when she ups her pledge so we can do that. Eric Cox upped his pledge. Andrew Bauer upped his pledge. We're getting a lot of people who are coming back and finding a lot of value in the podcast. That, to me, I think I've said this before, is so rewarding when I see that. And I'm like, dude, not only do you like us enough to give us a little more money. That's cool.
Yes.
That's really cool.
And we rely on our donors. We have no other source of income other than our day jobs.
Well, isn't that true for everybody?
I mean, I guess so. The podcast has no other source of income.
The podcast, yes, correct. We're not selling ads. Although we did sell that one ad,
Once.
the
Well,
Red Ocean Tattoo,
yeah.
because they're cool dudes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
would love to do that stuff in the future. Just give people shouts.
Michael Donato,
Thank you, Michael.
Stephen McVeigh,
Thank you, Stephen.
Anja Franson,
I'm going to go with yes. Unless it's Anja.
Anha,
Anja? I'm not familiar with that name, but Anja, Miss Franson, Mr. Franson, I'm not really sure. We rely on people like you.
Kanzma, I'm glad you're feeling the peer pressure to up your pledge, because that's exactly why we do this.
And right when we started recording, Mr. Fate Phyrix upped his pledge. He was one of our biggest donors.
And if you listen to the other podcast, Just Roll With It, he plays Ryder.
Yes. Check out the D&D podcast that is roughly
fun.
associated with the Spoilers podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically me and some of the people who listen to Watt Spoilers playing D&D.
Yes.
And we're relatively new. We're still learning the rules, so if you don't know the rules, it's a good way to sort of get started and learn with us. And it's been fun for me to play the game, and it's been fun for me to just make friends with these folks. They're an awesome group of people, so go check it out. And because we're doing this live, not only is Fate upped his pledge, but it looks like Britt Workman has and Christopher Bodinger has.
While we were talking.
While we're talking.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Way to sneak in under the wire. Literally hitting refresh on that one. I assume Christopher Bodinger is the Bow Tiger?
Oh, yeah. Excellent observation. Is it Bodiger?
Oh, and he's
Boatger?
correcting my pronunciation as Betger.
Betger. Okay. There's a lot of vowels in there. And by that I mean like 3, but
B-O-E-T is apparently bet as opposed to boat.
Whatever, Germany. Do what you want.
Just throw some vowels in there. It's fine. They're good. Just sprinkle them in there.
It's better that way with an O.
Just sprinkle some vowels on them, Johnson. Let's get out of here.
Was that Dave Chappelle, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Dave Chappelle. And so the other thing I wanted to do, because we're coming to a relatively significant point, to me, in this series, which is the end of the first trilogy. And trilogies are massively significant in the fantasy world.
Totally.
And this is a real solid, I don't want to say ending point, but resolution of this. We know Rand is the Dragon Reborn at the end of this book. And he has completed his hero's journey.
Farm boy to hero.
Right. And so I just want to reach out and thank some of our heroes who have been supporting us massively financially since we started doing this podcast.
Yes.
It's made a huge difference for us. We've been able to do things like advertising, which has brought in people. We've been able to do things like pay our rent on the studio, which has made us, there wouldn't be 150 episodes if it weren't for these 13 plus 1 people. On Patreon, I want to thank the 13 people who have given us over $100.
Yes.
And one person gave us $100 outside of Patreon, so I'm going to thank him too. Patrick, you pointed out, I didn't notice it at first, just how awesome the number 13 is, that we have these 13 people.
Yeah, Seth was going through the list and figuring out exactly how many there were of people above that, in that highest tier of donors, and he was like, "Oh, there's 13," and I was like, "Well, that's satisfying." 13 most powerful followers.
And some of these people have been supporting us. Part of the way they've gotten so high is they've been supporting us since the beginning. I mean, it's been over a year of financial support from these folks.
I think, I'm not looking at the numbers, but I think several of them have actually just been donating since the beginning.
Yeah.
Just a small amount of money, but since we started, and that is, 12 months.
In no particular order, Jed Dews has been donating for quite some time. And he's someone we don't get to hear from a lot, but you've been awesome, Jed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jed.
Andrew Berea.
Thank you, Andrew.
Andrew, again, been donating forever. Jeffrey Petrie, who we met at JordanCon, and if you remember, he's got that amazing arm sleeve tattoo.
Best Wheel of Time tattoo I've ever seen in my life.
Fantastic. And he got that at Red Ocean Tattoo, a sponsor of the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
If you live nearby or you just want to make us look really good, go to Savannah, Georgia, get a tattoo, and say it's because you listen to our podcast.
Totally.
Red Ocean Tattoo.
Fate Firix?
Fate, you're the heart of the dark. You're my heart of the dark.
I still think of you as Ryder. You'll always ride into my heart.
Aww.
Noble Fiend, a.k.a. Just John.
You've been around since the beginning.
He is one of our early Discord users. He was one of the few people who's hung out on Discord in the beginning when there was him and 1 or 2 other people.
Yeah.
It was very small. So he is a big part of what the Discord has become. And he totally took the name Just John from one of my mistakes. So I'll always remember that every time I read his name. Amy Kisling, who has been doing us a huge favor when it comes to SpoilerCon 2018.
We're having a Portland meetup for whoever wants to come, What Spoilers fans.
Yes, October 12th, 13th, 14th. If you're in Portland, Oregon, or can get to Portland, Oregon, it's going to be a great time.
Do it.
We've got, I think, 25 to 30 people who have committed to showing up, at least.
It's going to be a bunch of nerds drinking. Good times.
Some of them aren't going to drink.
Oh, well, you don't have to drink.
Yeah. One of the things we'll be doing is Saturday night, we're actually renting out the second floor of the restaurant that I work at.
Cool.
And so we'll be having sort of a dinner, drinking party there that'll be sort of a private space for all of us.
That is awesome.
And then there's a ton of other stuff that Amy's planning that I don't know.
She is telling us what to do, so.
Morgantini, Jonathan Morgantini has been donating forever.
I don't think I've ever heard of that guy.
Yeah, no, I don't. So Morgantini's an awesome dude. He's come and hung out with us once, and he is my lore master over in the D&D podcast. So he runs that game, and so I hang out with him every week, and hope he doesn't kill my character.
Thank you, Aganor.
John Hunt, you've been supporting us forever. Haven't ever really heard from you, but you're awesome.
You are awesome, man. Feel free to pop in and say what's up sometime.
Yeah, feel free to say hi. Neil Williams, I think I talked to fairly early on in the podcast stage, but haven't heard from you lately. But thank you for all your support.
Thank you for listening.
Karen K. Lindabo.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Karen. Nick Hood has been supporting us for a long time.
Appreciate you, Nick.
Paul, no last name.
Just Paul.
I appreciate your anonymity. Anemone? I appreciate your anemone. That's what I'm sticking with.
I dig it.
Anonymity. That's the word I'm looking for. And then, last but certainly not least, Christine Rice, who also is one of the D&D players. She is Nimrodel over on that server.
Christine, you're here right now.
And Christine's here.
Or
Thank you,
she's
Christine.
listening anyway.
You are awesome. You're not only a supporter, you're a good friend.
And wait, DT.
And of course, the +1. Those were our 13. But DT has supported us outside the podcast, and we met him at the con. And he's an awesome dude from Canada. So here's to my fellow Canadian.
You are our Mazrim Tame, DT. And all of you together create the backbone of our army of the dark. Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you to everybody else who's donated. There's a whole bunch of other people who have given us a ton of money. I had to draw the cutoff somewhere, else I'd be thanking people all day. But I felt like those, at least, group of people have gone above and beyond to support us financially.
Yeah, we really appreciate that. And like I said already, this is the podcast's only source of income, so we rely on you guys.
Mm-hmm. Although that may change in the future.
It's true. This has been a fairly exciting month for Seth and I because I'm trying to think of the most succinct way to say this. So, check it out.
Check it.
We, right now, as of September 26th at 7:19 p.m. Hold on, I'm going to pull out the page and refresh it. Have currently received 29,664 downloads on the 26th of the month, which means by tomorrow we will be fall squarely into the category of podcasts that are can
advertise.
Yes. We can now have some strength in negotiating with advertisers if we so chose, which we probably will, because to be honest, this is really what we want to be doing. And, you know, bartending's cool and all, but it's bartending.
Yeah. I'd rather talk to you guys about fantasy novels than make people food.
And even, you know, if we were making a livable income off the podcast, which we now have the potential to do, possibly, we still have to figure out there's a ton of stuff that we have to figure out.
Right.
But we now can begin looking seriously at this. And if that was the case, you know, Seth and I could consider things like making a fourth podcast, or to just putting a lot more work into What Spoilers, clearing our schedule so we can record at the same times every week.
So we don't end up with these like 2-week gaps. Yeah.
We have been slowly rising over the last year, and we finally got to that level. Unless we get no downloads for the rest of it, which is just not going to happen. No. We got like 5 while I was saying that. So, I mean, we're fine.
And I want to say, I think what happened, I think the reason why we've seen significant growth over the last week or two is because you guys got out there and started bugging Rafe Jenkins, and you asked him perhaps a little too much. there was a lot of questions asking him to be on the podcast. I counted at least 4. We could have kept that down to 1 or 2, but I mean,
just keep bothering.
No, okay, keep bothering. But I think what happened is so many people were following the AMA who loved the Wheel of Time, and they saw you guys be so enthusiastic about our podcast that we have now a massive group of new folks who have come to listen to the podcast. And if you were just joining us because you saw that, thank you very much. Like, I appreciate you coming to see us. You probably just binged 150 episodes, so you've listened to a lot of me talk.
Welcome.
Again, this is a day of thanks. Thank you to everyone who got out there and contacted Rafe, and put our name out there for people who are looking at the What Spoilers.
That was a significant effort. I'm sure it was fun for you guys, but that was basically free advertising. And basically, it was free advertising.
It was free advertising.
Yeah, there's no really way around that. And a day or two after your Twitter bomb for fun, we had our highest day, and the next highest day below that was 100% less downloads. It was like our highest day, but doubled.
Yeah, we doubled our top number of downloads in one day after that Twitter thing. It's just massive spike on the graph. It looks stupid.
Yeah.
It's really...
it makes all our old big days look pathetic.
It really does. It's almost sad because I know we're not going to match it anytime soon because it was like all this massive traffic in one day. So I've been trying to figure out if it's Russian bots or some other source, but I really, based on the rates that they're coming in, it's not all at once. The fact that we have corresponding ratings, we have corresponding donations, and corresponding traffic in a bunch of other places makes me think that it really is legitimately new people checking us out and joining the podcast for the first time, a large number of them.
And so for the last 5 days have been 5 of the biggest days we've ever had. We've had days that got to the lower ones, to the lower peaks of the last 5 days.
Those were days when we released episodes. We haven't released an episode over the last 5 days. So we've had some of our biggest days, and we haven't even put out an episode, which are usually the big ones.
Going through backlogs.
Right.
We love all of you. Thank you for making our dreams appear on the horizon.
So as we come to the end of Dragon Reborn, and as Rand becomes the hero, I feel like we too are ascending to the next level. It's strange how much that works together.
Basement nerds to real podcasters.
And how fucking awesome is it that we are about to start The Shadow Rising, which
so
is
fucking awesome.
If I had to pick a favorite book of all time, The Shadow Rising would be it.
Me too. And I was asking in the Discord earlier, and TSR is one of the favorites of the fan community, it seems like.
It's when the series... I don't want to say it comes into its own, because it came into its own in The Great Hunt.
Yeah.
But it's when the series goes from being relatively straightforward to being a tapestry of amazing... world. Yeah, amazingness. So, like, it's this amazing world that we get to experience for the first time. It's beyond one person's story, and it starts becoming the world. Nope. We're no longer in Rand's head or in these following these people. We're experiencing the way a world deals with Armageddon.
Yeah, a rich, complex world of many cultures, peoples, ethnicities, and Trollocs. What's up, Narg?
And everyone gets their own storyline. We don't have these groups of people. We have individual storylines. Oh God, and the Terran Real trip that Rand takes in the Waste.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's probably the best piece of writing of all time, in my opinion.
Into the Waste, kids.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?